We talked in the last class about the idea of the peopling of the Americas. And of course, what I mean by that is how human beings that began in East Africa and populated over a period of 30 to 40,000 years into Europe and Asia came here to the New World. When they get here, it's a very different place than they're used to. And it's a place that, as much as they have to adjust to it, has to adjust to them. And things are great when the first Americans come here. The hunting is phenomenal. Large mammals that have zero fear of people. Plenty of open land to settle land that is not claimed. Things go really well until about 10,000 years ago, until about 8,000 BCE. Because in 8,000 BCE, we see the great warming of the earth, the Pleistocene era, the Ice Age, ends. And huge amounts of plant and animal life go extinct. The earth gets too hot, too dry, too fast. So people have to make the decision that other animals living here in the Americas couldn't make. Right? Do we do what we always did and go extinct? Or do we adapt and change? And what we're going to talk about today is how that adaptation looks, how human beings use that amazing gift of brain power they had to survive this massive extinction. And I think most importantly, kind of set us up for understanding who we are today. I explained to you in detail in the last class, and it was, pretty interesting at times, how a hunting, gathering society really kind of plays into the way people live and the way people see themselves. But what we haven't seen yet in America is going to be the idea of a permanent settlement, right? This idea that a group of people feel comfortable and feel safe enough and feel secure enough that they can stay in one place and never move, right? They know that the next day they wake up, there's going to be food, there's going to be resources, this kind of thing. We don't really see that here. We see some examples of it. But I would caution you to put too much stock in these. We see them in places like Alaska, on the Pacific coast. We see them in places like Oregon and modern Washington, right, the Pacific Northwest. We see them in places like New England, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. This idea that family groups, 40, 50 individuals or less, are staying in one place, not day after day, but year after year. Okay, and the reason they can do that there, and the reason, say, for example, they can't do that anywhere else, like in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Nebraska, what have you, is because they have an endless supply of food. And that comes in the form of the ocean. Right? These are coastal communities. If the ocean runs out of fish, we're all in big trouble. We're long gone. So these people believe that they didn't have to move around. They could just stay by the coast. They could eat lobsters and crabs and oysters and clams and fish all the time, and they felt secure and safe. That's great for them, but we wouldn't call that like a permanent settlement in America. And what you're going to find is the struggle to do that is enormously complex and very long. And as we'll see, it doesn't necessarily sync up with the rest of the world. So if you want to see the first real permanent sedentary community in American history, now we're talking North America here, specifically what is today the continental United States, you're going to see this. We don't know who these people were. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what they called this place. But locals today and historically have called it Poverty Point. This is in modern Delhi, Louisiana, along the Mississippi River. Now, if you look at this image of this artist's rendition of Poverty Point, again, whatever they called it, we don't know, you're going to see a lot of similarities. Like, this might look familiar. The structure of the buildings, I hesitate to call them that because they're made of dirt, looks like very Mesoamerican. Aztec, Maya, right? But they are hundreds of miles south in Mexico and the Yucatan and Central America. But understand, there is communication there. There is a trade network that runs from the very tip of South America to Alaska, the very tip of North America, right? It's a cultural zone in a way, not as connected as other places, but way more connected than we think. Okay, a couple things we can see about it. Does it look like an accident? No way. What you have here are major temples. Here's one mound, Mound A, Mound B, a ceremonial ball court. You have rows and rows of homes, individual homes, thatched huts, made of raw materials, wood and grasses. But nothing about that is accidental. So when we see that, we don't just say, here's people that settled down for a little while. What we're seeing here is a society, not hunters and gatherers. Remember, if you're in a hunting-gathering society and you're a hunter, you're a man, your only job is to hunt. If you're a woman, your only job is to gather. You don't become a lawyer. You don't become an architect. You don't become a professional writer. You don't become a surgeon. You might do all those things, incidentally. But your job is to hunt or gather. Everybody's job is the same. But here, it's very different. All right? This is going to go back to 1500 BCE. That's 3,500 years before our present time. What can we infer about this? Well, archaeologists believe this is generally designed, this whole city, in the shape of a hawk. 700 feet long are each of these individual rows. Some of these temples are 700 feet high. None of that is an accident. Think about this. If you have a design, what you necessarily have is a designer, an architect. The one thing I told you, right, that you couldn't be in a hunting-gathering society. So what these people have here is, for the first time in American history that we see, is a boss, a supervisor. Thanks a lot. Yeah, they have somebody in charge. That means there's a boss and there's workers beneath them. There's a designer instructing much larger groups of people what to do. This is a stratified society. Okay, these are not hunters and gatherers. They're doing something that no one has done before in what is today the continental United States. Okay, they are saving up food, storing up food, maybe living off the land. Maybe the Mississippi River has enough sea life, fish, and whatever that can sustain them. Something is allowing them to stay in place and continuously build. Okay. Problem is, poverty point is going to mysteriously and quickly disappear. All of these people that had been living for 4 or 5 generations in a city made the decision that living in that city is no longer the safest way, the easiest way, the most secure way to feed their families. And they say hunting and gathering was better. Now, we talked about how difficult hunting and gathering was. Can you imagine that decision, to walk away from a society? Because hunting and gathering, that pretty difficult life, was easier and more reliable to feed your family. So we do have, by 1500 BCE, people trying to stay in one place here in America, but it isn't working. Now, we can forgive that as moderns, right? We can say, well, they did their best. It's not easy to build a civilization from nothing, right? There's whole video games about that very thing, the challenge of building a civilization. But the problem is, that only makes sense until you understand what's going on in the rest of the world. Okay? By the time we see poverty point, 1500 BCE, just to give you some ideas, the world's first civilization, the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, in modern Iraq, by the time we see them doing this, the Sumerian civilization has been in place for 3,500 years. Like, think about that. 3,500 years before this, somewhere in the world, there are cities, there are shops, there are storekeepers, there are theaters and actors and writers. Okay? Like people are living in a civilized way 3,500 years before this. And this is impressive, but let's be real. All they were doing was stacking dirt. Like it was very neatly designed. Okay? I'm not trying to take away from them, but they were stacking dirt. These weren't made out of stone, these weren't permanent additions to the landscape. The Mesopotamians have had a civilization for 3,500 years by the time they even try it here, and it fails. Think about what was going on in the world 3,500 years before today. You're talking about ancient Greece, Plato and Socrates, even older than that. Like that's ancient history, right? So the world, civilized world, is already ancient by the time Americans are even trying to even make a go at making a city. And they fail. The ball rolls there. I mean, 3,500, let's see, 1,500 BCE for Poverty Point here. The Great Pyramids of Giza, you guys know that. Those are already almost 3,000 years old, right? Closer to 2,000, actually. Those are already 2,000 years old, the Great Pyramids of Giza. Listen to me, people in Egypt at this same time look at the Great Pyramids and say, what the heck is that? Who built that, right? They've already forgotten it's so old. And here in America, the best we can do is ornately, but still, simply stacking dirt, and they fail. And this is not going to be the last time they try to figure that out. So the question you have to ask yourself is, and this is what I want you to think about today, and until we meet again, right, is what does the rest of the world have that these people do not? You can do what historians did for a long time. For a long time. And it's an embarrassing indictment of our field until about 30, 40 even years ago. They would say, well, these native peoples were just inferior to the rest of the world. They were intellectually inferior. You know the word they used. Savages. But I can prove to you that wasn't true. These people were just as smart as anybody else in the world, just as smart as you and I, in fact, for sure. And they did amazing things. But there was something they were missing that wouldn't let them, put in the key and turn it over and get that engine going. The engine being a permanent civilization that doesn't vanish. So we'll talk about more examples and see if we can figure that out. They're going to try again, native peoples. This time, anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 years ago, 500 BCE, 500 years before the birth of Christ, right? 1,000 years before the Prophet Muhammad. They're going to try again. And a new group of people are going to emerge, and we don't know what they call themselves, but we call them the Adena peoples. And they didn't live in Louisiana. They lived where we are today. The Ohio River Valley, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, the upper Mississippi, right? Illinois and Missouri. And these were people that, again, tried to make a go of staying in one place for multiple generations. They built these enormous earthen mounds, burial mounds, and they used to be all over this river valley, like where we sit now, right? They were here. And in the 1800s, like 150 years ago, when Europeans came, they didn't know what they were. They just plowed them over. But these burial mounds were sacred. All right, they were filled with the dead loved ones of their ancestors. Today we bury our dead. What they did was stack piles of dirt on top of their dead. So you get these, 100, 150 foot high mounds of earth. And when you see them, they're not natural. I mean, they are unmistakably made by the hand of man. And the Adena people for 500 years or so will make a go of it. And they're going to try to stay in one place. And they're going to try to abandon hunting and gathering. They're going to try to have a life in one area. I don't like to use the word civilized because that means indicates that they were not. I'm not trying to say that. But sedentary, staying in one place. And they too, just like Poverty Point, will have to walk away. Now, if you want to see one of these mounds, again, they used to be all over the place. If you're from Beaver County, Beaver Falls Hospital, there used to be a very large mound there. They knocked it over. Um, there is still one in place in Moundsville, West Virginia. It's about 90-minute drive away from where we sit, Pittsburgh. And it's a museum. It's a state museum site. You can climb to the top of the mound. It's unmistakably made by humans from the time of Christ, from the time of the Caesar Augustus, Emperor of Rome. I want you to think about Rome. My gosh. Rome has gladiator games. They're fighting wars of conquest. They have an intricate network of roads. They have a postal system. Right? Rome, in ancient Rome, they had indoor plumbing, for Pete's sake. Indoor plumbing. And what do these people have? Stacks of dirt. Again, I don't want to diminish what they're doing, but this has to be eating at you by now. What are they missing that everybody else seemed to have? We're all the same species. We're all capable of the same things. Right? What are they missing? They're going to give it another go if you need more evidence. What you're looking at here is the Serpent Mound, developed by the Hopewell culture. They're going to also live in the Ohio River Valley. These dates need to be switched. They'd be time travelers if those dates were correct. But they're going to appear about 400 BCE. They'll disappear a short time later, around 200 BCE. Incidentally, these stacked earthen mounds are all over southern Ohio. They were recently named UNESCO World Heritage Sites, like within the last 2 days, because they're ancient. As ancient as anything you'd see in Europe. You can see this image is of Serpent Mound. It's enormous. It's shaped like a snake. It lines up with celestial bodies, major events of the sky, right? Stars that move, planetary movements. They understood all of that. These were not an inferior people. I have to stress that to you. They were not. But they will have to walk away. They will have to leave this amazing creation. And we still preserve it as a state and national park today. Because they can't make a go of it. It's easier to hunt and gather. It's almost unbelievable. It's almost unbelievable. So why? Well, let's look at the rest of the world. The Great Pyramids, by this point, 3,500 years old. The first civilization, the Sumerians, are going on 5,000 years old. I'm talking cities with armies, wars, literature, all that. The Great Wall of China, 500 years old by the time they even start doing this. Like, this is amazing. Serpent Mound is incredible. I'm so amazed by the ingenuity of these people. But the Great Wall of China is 500 years old. And this is the best they can do, and they still fail. There's some fundamental inequality that exists in our world between Europe and Asia and Africa and North and South America. It has nothing to do with the people and everything to do with what I would argue is nothing more than chance. Geography. All right, so what do I mean? You're looking at here a growth chart. Okay? For most of what we understand to be recorded history, in Mexico, a tall grass grew called teosinte. You see it right there. Teosinte was a lot like any grain or grass you see kind of growing in fields around here today, right? Long, tall stalk. They kind of blow in the wind. It grows really fast. It's a grass. You couldn't really eat it, right? The seeds on teosinte were small. There was some nutritional value, but not much. Not like, say, for example, its cousin, wheat, oats, barley. Okay? These things just grew naturally in the wild. You know, if you would go to the Middle East, say 10,000 years ago, Iraq, primarily, some of the areas and countries surrounding it, and you would have just walked out into the wilderness, what would you have seen just growing everywhere? You would have seen wheat, oats, and barley. That's what you would have saw. Just like growing naturally, not like a farmer put them there. All right. You go outside, you see these grains. If you would have been in China, Korea, Japan, just growing naturally everywhere, you wouldn't have seen wheat, oats, or barley, but you would have seen rice. Wheat, oats, and barley and rice are what we classify as cereal grains. And what that means is when you want to plant, say, wheat, oats, barley, or rice, it's very easy. You just take a handful of it, take 100 grains of rice, and you throw them. And guess what? They're grass. They're going to grow, and they're going to grow fast. And you really don't have to take care of them much. Think about growing like a tomato plant. You plant one seed, you wait all summer, it slowly grows. You got to tend to it and pick it, pick off little things and protect it from bugs. And then after like 9 weeks, you get a fruit. Like, congratulations. If you need that tomato plant to survive, you're not going to survive 9 or 10 weeks till you get one tomato. And even when you do, it's not going to be enough to keep you alive. Let's say you do manage to grow 1,000 tomatoes. Great. You put them in a basket, you set them aside. How many days, legitimately, do you have before that basket of tomatoes is a disgusting, rotting mess, right? Not long. Tomatoes are great when they're fresh. Now compare that to growing wheat, oats, barley, or rice. You don't got to plant one seed and tend it. You just throw a whole handful of it, and it's grass. It grows super fast. It's why we have to mow the lawn every week in the summer, right? It's going to grow. And then when you pick the seeds off of them, you don't have to eat them right away, because the great thing about cereal grains is they last forever if you keep them dry, right, and keep them clean. It's as different from, say, a tomato as you can get. Heck, an apple tree, right? It takes 8, 9 years for an apple tree from a seed to when you actually eat. You're not going to survive on that. That's not going to be a food source that helps you. Cereal grains were the key. They last a long time, and they're very versatile. I have a tin of oatmeal in my house. It's almost 11 years old. This is an experiment. My wife isn't thrilled about this, but I keep saving. I'm never going to eat it. If it comes to the time when I have to eat this, we're all in big trouble. But I just save it, and like once a year I open it, like oatmeal, because I want to see like what the condition of the grain is. And going on 11 years, it's it's a little stale, but it still looks like something in a pinch I could eat. Can you imagine if I had a basket of oranges from 10 years ago? It'd be a nightmare. It'd be an absolute nightmare. So long-lasting cereal grains are the key to civilization, because you can grow a whole bunch of it really fast, and you don't have to eat it right away. You can store it, and you can keep growing and keep storing, so you build up extra. That's what we call surplus. Now, it should be no surprise that civilization begins in the world in the Middle East, because wheat, oats, and barley just like grew naturally there. Like, they didn't have to experiment. They didn't have to find a good crop suitable for farming. Those things were just growing outside. And in East Asia, rice was just growing outside. In North and South America, do you know what you won't find? You'll find a lot of things. But what you won't find is a single shred of wheat, oat, barley, or rice anywhere. All of those grains came from somewhere else. The native people we've been talking about had no rice, had no oats, had no cereal grain at all. So even if they wanted to farm, they had nothing. They tried to farm sunflower seeds, right? Go nuts. Sunflower seeds are pretty amazing. They're packed with good fats. They're packed with good nutrition, but they're super labor intensive, and they're really hard to get the actual seed, So that's not like a viable option. That's what grew here. What else grew here? Blueberries, raspberries, strawberries. Those are great. Strawberries grow for like 4 weeks in the summer, and they don't last long at all. You can't farm that. Okay? We had gooseberries, we had blackberries, we had cranberries, pumpkins. See? I mean, it's just not ideal for farming. Look at the other places in the world. Look at what they had. Just the random chance of geography. Rice, wheat, oats, and barley. Food you could grow quickly, store up, and then you could stop hunting and gathering. You could start to build a home. You could start to stay in one place. You could start to get a job because you knew you had your paycheck ready for it. You had food saved somewhere beside your home, probably, as a surplus. But it wasn't just cereal grains. It was the animals of these places. If you would go to the Middle East 10,000 years ago, and you would have walked out of your settlement, and you would have said, what animals are wandering around, right? Just like, what could I farm if I wanted to? The animals that wandered around the Middle East were pigs, goats, sheep, cow, horses. You gotta be kidding me. You might say, well, that's weird. Those are all farm animals. Like, well, no, they're not all farm animals. They're all animals suited for farming, and they all happen to be in the Middle East. Chickens, ducks, they were in Asia. Okay? They were in Asia. So these are all perfect for farming. I want you to think about a chicken. Ideal for farming. They mature pretty fast, and they lay eggs every single day. So if you have to feed your family, get 10 chickens. They eat very little. They mostly feed themselves, foraging bugs and seeds or whatever, and they give you at least 1 egg a day. And if you have 10 chickens, you can feed a family that way. And when they stop producing eggs, you can just butcher them and eat them. Right? Then you just take one of those eggs and hatch it, and you got another chicken back. It's a perfect system. It's ideal for farming. There's no chickens in America. There's no ducks in America. Okay, this type of fowl are only native to East Asia. They'll spread throughout Africa, throughout Europe, but there will never be a chicken in America until someone brings one over. Think about that. Think about a pig. Why would you want to farm a pig? Well, pigs are enormously prolific. Number one, they mature from a piglet to a full-size hog pretty fast. Usually in, 6 months, they're edible. They hold an enormous amount of muscle on their bodies. Perfect for butchering and eating. And you're getting a lot of meat for very little work. They eat scraps. And again, they're enormously prolific. Right? A sow, a female pig, can have up to 3 litters of babies every year. Think about this. She can have a full litter 3 times a year, and litters are anywhere from 9 to 12 babies. So this is not a science class, but if you have 2 pigs, male and female, we don't have to get into how this works, you can have 36 pigs by the end of the year. So it's super easy to eat one, kill one, right? Perfect for farming. Cows, they hold gigantic amounts of meat, and they're herding animals. So you can move 30 or 40 cows very easily by just moving the leader. They have babies really quickly as well, not like pigs, but still. Cows give you milk, right? Milk is beneficial for our bodies. It gives us antibodies and enzymes from the cow itself. You don't have to eat milk right away or drink milk right away. There's different ways to use it. You can process it into cheese. It can sit on your shelf for years as cheese. Cut a piece off and eat it if you're starving or not, right? Perfect for farming. You can make it into yogurt. You can make it into butter. It's an ideal farming animal. What animals were in the New World? What animals were in North and South America? Why didn't they farm here? Well, go have a look. You have deer. Go catch one. Try to farm it. You have elk. Some people do farm elk today, but it's not ideal. You have black bears. Go get one. Let's try to farm that thing. All right? This is not an ideal situation. In fact, it's a wretched situation. People couldn't farm here even if they wanted to. They didn't have the plants and animals available. They did have llamas, alpacas, vicunas, and they did farm them for wool. But, that's not going to feed you on a large scale like chickens, cows, goats, sheep, and pigs. They didn't have any of those things in North or South America. Could it be that the thing that separated North and South Americans from everybody else was nothing more than the blessings or the curse of geography? I believe it was. They didn't have rice, wheat, oat, or barley. They didn't have any of these farmable animals. They were just as smart as everybody else, but everybody else had that natural advantage of geography. But let's go back to this grain we saw, this grass, teosinte. In Mexico, they figured out a few things about the teosinte grain, and one of them was some of the grain had bigger seeds than others. So they had this idea. This is about 5,000 BCE, 7,000 years ago. What if we only plant the big seeds and we don't plant the small seeds? What would happen? What they discovered was only plants with big seeds grew, right? That genetic information was passed down from one generation to the next. And they kept planting only the biggest seeds and the most healthful seeds. And after several generations, that little piece of grass turns into corn. Here is your proof positive that these people were not just inferior to the rest of the world. Everyone else on earth had a cereal grain naturally occurring in their world to farm. And people here in North and South America didn't. So what did they do? They invented one. Incredible. They invented one. Corn should not exist in our world. Anytime you pick up an ear of corn, understand you are holding the world's first genetically modified organism. Right? And it was made by these people here in America. Corn shouldn't exist. I want you to think about if you've ever been lucky enough to eat fresh corn, right? Go to a farmer's market. You got to sit down, you got to peel the husk off, you got to pick off all the little furs, right, that's on there. Corn is super labor intensive. The way most plants work is that their number one priority of survival is to spread their seeds. So flowers become very beautiful to attract bees. Some plants give off a certain smell to attract insects to pollinate. Corn, because of that big nasty husk, I really think about this. Corn essentially has no way of propagating itself, of spreading its seed, unless we help. Because no animal is going to sit there and peel that husk away like we do. Corn can't grow on its own because corn shouldn't exist. Corn only exists because human beings invented it. If we all Thanos'd out of existence today, boom, gone. Corn goes with us because if we're not there to plant it, it's done growing. Corn has no way to self-propagate because it should not be here. It's not natural. It's a creation of man. No one else in the world had to do that. Right? But here in America, they had no choice. They had to figure it out. All right, any questions? Probably didn't think we talked about corn that much in any of your classes, but here we go. So when farming begins, it's going to begin in Mexico. Once they figure out how to make corn and propagate corn, the Paleolithic age ends. Remember Paleolithic, the old Stone Age. And the Neolithic age begins, the new Stone Age. What separates the Paleolithic from the Neolithic is one thing: farming. The moment you stop chasing your food and start growing it is when the Paleolithic age ends and the Neolithic age begins. So it's no wonder Mesopotamia has been around, for 5,000 years before anyone even attempts to figure out settlement in a permanent way here in America. They had all those blessings of geography. And here in America, we did not. But once they figure out corn, they are off to the races. It's like a magic fairy dust gets sprinkled into their world. Okay. The first place we're going to see civilizations emerge in the New World are going to be where corn grows. It's going to be in Mexico. Okay? And corn, develops in an arid desert environment that Mexico is. So, you could really only grow it in arid places. If you would have taken the corn from Mexico and given it to people who lived in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Oregon or North Dakota and said, here, just plant this, it'll grow, that is not going to grow. It's like taking a cactus, right, and bringing it here and say, plant it. It's going to be dead by winter, unless you have the eastern prickly pear. That's our cactus. But anyway, it's not going to grow. It's a desert plant. So what happens? You have this great new crop. It's a game changer, but it only grows in certain conditions. So where do we first see corn growing in what is today the continental United States? We're going to see it here. What is today the American Southwest? New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, and Texas. Why there? Well, corn is invented in a hot, dry desert. And this is a hot, dry desert. But it's unbelievable. It's like the moment these people get this corn, once they get the seeds and the information on how to grow it, everything changes. Everything changes. They abandon hunting and gathering. They begin building entire cities. They begin building religious communities. It's like the spark of civilization has finally found them. Okay? If you look at these, what we call early corn cultures of the Southwest, they know exactly what I'm telling you to be true. If you look at their religious symbolism, corn is everywhere. Their goddess is called the Corn Mother. Right? She has the head and body of a woman. The lower half is like an ear of corn. And they don't believe that's what she looks like. But what they're trying to show is, we know we're here because of this crop. They store corn in ceremonial pits called kivas. Okay, think about that. We store grain in silos. There's cows kicking around. Big deal. Where they store their corn is their most religious space, because they know corn is that important to them. I have on the screen here an image of something called the Aztec calendar. Not as popular, but just the same as the previous, maybe you've heard of the Mayan calendar. There was a time, people really crazy lately believe that the Mayan calendar predicted the end of the world. It's because they didn't understand the Mayan calendar. But here's an example of what corn can do. I want you to think about this. Think about our calendar we use today. We are so advanced. We are so specialized. We're the most advanced society in human history. How many days do we have in our calendar year? We have 365 days. Right. Do we have 365 days every year? No. It's a mathematically busted formula. Because every 4 years, for our calendar to work, we have to cheat. This would get you an F in any math class you take. Every 4 years, we have to add an extra day, February 29th, a leap year. Because our calendar doesn't work. It's a bad formula. Imagine if you came here from a different planet and someone said to you, we have a calendar. It has 365 days most of the time. So what are you talking about? Okay, it's not possible. Well, here's the thing. What if I told you 2,000 years ago, the Maya, fueled by corn, had a calendar that was perfect every year with no cheating, with no leap year. It was 365 days year round. The Mayan calendar, which will be later adopted by the Aztec, that's what you see here, is going to have 19 months. They didn't call them months. They called them baktun. 18 of these baktun will have the same amount of days, 20 days. The 19th baktun, the 19th month, was shorter. It had 5 days. But what that gave you was a perfect 365-day calendar every year without a leap year. They had that figured out 2,000 years ago, and we still have a calendar today that does not work. So corn is going to be transformative. Cities will emerge. This is a city dug directly, carved, I should say, directly into the side of a canyon. Remember why people never built towns and cities when they were hunters and gatherers, because they didn't think they'd be sticking around long enough to enjoy them. These people dug a city into the side of a mountain. They were so sure they were going to be here. They took on a project of enormous consequence. This is probably something that was started by grandfathers and only lived in by their grandchildren. They were so sure they weren't going anywhere. They took on a project that they generationally would probably never even get to enjoy. That is a bold statement. We are here to stay. And what makes that possible? Art like this. What makes that possible? It's corn. Corn. Could it be that the secret to civilization is something as simple as a grain we see every single day? I believe it is. So when we come back on Friday, we're going to talk about the explosion of culture as a result of corn, and exactly how that will dictate and determine future events. If you have any questions, come on up. Otherwise, see you next time.